Hello, Brandon. So looking at your introduction to your essay, I like your first sentence. I think it's a compelling first sentence and a nice transition into what you're going to be writing about. I don't love your position statement, however. Although they align in some of their styles, they also present their position on censorship in different views, but through different techniques. So here are some of my issues with that. The different techniques are the how, and there's no good reason to mention that in your position statement anyway. And different views through different techniques is a little confusing. But more importantly, they have a position on censorship which is different, but that's all you've told me. You haven't told me what you think Wilbur's position on censorship is. You haven't told me what you think Colin's position on censorship is. You haven't told me whether that point or that position on censorship is the point of what they're trying to accomplish in this poem. And that ultimately was the prompt. How does the poet make his point? So you have to be very specific about what the point is. And there are ways to do that. While Wilbur seems to think that it is appropriate to comfort a child by lying to him or her, Collins takes a different approach. Or you could be more specific and say Collins thinks that lying contributes to the darkness that the children have toward each other. So I'm going to take a minute and look at your body paragraphs, and I'll be right back. You have some really, really good concrete examples in your body paragraphs. I'm a little less impressed by how you've organized them. You seem to have tried to organize them by sound/diction, which are not the same thing, then by dramatic irony in the second paragraph, and their stance on censorship in the third paragraph, although the stance on censorship is actually what you're supposed to be talking about all the way through. In respect to sound, and then you go on to talk about diction, doesn't make a lot of sense. Perhaps it would have been more useful to have organized the body into 2 or 4 body paragraphs. The Wilbur paragraph and then the Collins paragraph, or perhaps doing something along the lines of, Wilbur's word choice, Wilbur's use of sound, Collins' word choice, Collins' use of sound. You've got great examples here, but I don't know that you necessarily use them to support your position on what it is that the poets are trying to say about censorship. Similarly, I think if you look in this paragraph, for example, Wilbur is all of this of the paragraph. Then you've got a little bit of Collins, and then you go back to Wilbur again. So ultimately, even though you're talking about both poems in this paragraph, you're really not talking about the Collins poem at all, comparatively. In this one, same kind of problem. Similarly, the history teacher, you really just have these 2 sentences that involve Collins, and only one of the 2 is specifically about Collins. The other thing that I noticed is make sure that you're putting quotation marks around the things that are quotes, because you've got lots of little tiny quotes in here, which is fantastic, but give yourself credit for having used them. The weak and the smart, put quotation marks around the weak and the smart. Those are his words. And by putting quotation marks around them, you're referencing the fact that you know they are his words, and you're using them as one of the concrete examples to support you. So again, really good details, really good information from the poems. You really got the poems. A little bit less effective in terms of supporting your position, although your position isn't as super strong, so it's hard to support something when it's not really clear from the outset what it is you're going to be trying to support. And organizationally, I think there are some things you probably could have done differently. Let me take a look at your conclusion real quick. Not bad. I don't mind the length. I don't, again, think it's necessary to talk about the techniques. That's the how. That's your support. That's not your point. And I think you could have been more specific about what you thought each was saying about censorship. But the length is fine, and it sounds finished, and ultimately sounding finished is the purpose that your conclusion is supposed to serve in a timed writing. Overall, I'm going to say a 6 because you have some really good specific examples, but really not a good enough job of making an argument and defending that argument. Your examples are great, but if they're not in the service of an argument, they're not nearly as effective as they should be. Thanks.